So we're in chapter 10 of your government book, and we're talking about American federalism. And we went over, the relationship between federalism is our national central government, or you may call it our federal government, and the relationship between our state government and local government. So here we have a picture here of hunting and fishing license are usually cheaper for a resident of the state than for non-residents, and how the states cooperate with each other and how the states have to cooperate with the government, and all these powers, are meant to balance out, even though they don't really do that today. But also we went over Amendment 10, which says that any power not presented in the Constitution to the central government is given to the states, which would mean the states would have lots of power, or a lot of power in dealing with the people on the state and local level rather than the central government. And today, the central government has possibly a lot more power than expected for the Constitution. So I went over section, section 1. And so I wanted to go over the section 1 review, and then also go over this article, and I'll show an article that is in your book that's very interesting on this subject. So let's go over these. Section 1 review. So number 1, what type of republic does the United States have? What kind of republic does the United States have? The United States has a constitutional republic. Republic means we have representatives, from all the states, and we have representatives, and that's republic. And constitution means that we have a constitution that regulates what we can do and not do, or what the government can do and not do. So, number 2, why did the founders choose a federal system of government? Because they knew the nature of man is evil. The Bible says that. And that man's tendency is to take over and be powerful, ambitious. And they knew that. So they wanted to balance out the powers between the state and the national government, to check and balance each other, so one wouldn't get too more powerful than the other and take over. So the state checks on the nation and vice versa, so. List some powers denied to both the national government and the states. So there's a list back there. You can go, let's go back to that list here. Right here. So it says, list powers denied to both the national and state. So here's the national, state, and the powers that are denied. They cannot, right here it's listed here, they cannot grant titles of nobility, and they cannot pass, or they cannot permit slavery. They cannot deny citizens the right to vote because of race, color, or previous servitude. They cannot deny citizens the right to vote because of sex. These things are denied power by the Constitution. So number 4 is the powers shared by both the federal and the state. The powers, concurrent powers, it means they're shared. They're right here. Both states and federal government can collect taxes, they can collect taxes, and we know that because we have to pay taxes to the state and federal. The states and the federal can borrow money. They can make and enforce laws. They can establish courts, and they can provide for the general welfare of their people. And they can also charter banks and corporations, either one, all. So those are by both. And okay, what are the difference between expressed powers and implied powers? And we went over that here. Let's go back to that too. Right here. express powers are named in the Constitution, and implied powers are implied, or they depend on the interpretation of a judge that implies that these powers are in the Constitution, that they were implied. But they have to have a judge of the Supreme Court that rules their implied powers. So let's go back to our questions now. So, name the case in which the Supreme Court established the doctrine of implied powers. Do you remember that? It was McCulloch versus Maryland. And it basically was that to establish a national bank, because Maryland was putting taxes on the bank that was considered a national bank. And so they basically had to establish that the banks would be necessary and proper. No place in the Constitution says that the government could have a bank or establish a bank, but it said that the government could, collect certain taxes and duties, and the government could coin money. Well, they have to have a bank to do that. So it was implied powers, and so that was what McCulloch versus Maryland was. The reason it says Maryland, because Maryland was going to tax the national bank, and they couldn't, because it's a national bank, not a state bank. So number 7 says, in which amendment is the provision for the reserved powers found? The 10th Amendment. Remember, the 10th Amendment is that amendment that says that any powers that are not in the Constitution are reserved for the states. They belong to the states. Number 8, list some of the central government's obligations to the states. So the central government, basically obligation, the central government says that each state must have a republican form of government. Also, the central government must protect the states against foreign invasion, war, and domestic violence. So if there's violence happening in the states, they can go to the national government, and the national government can call in the military to protect them. So also, each state must have equal representative in the Senate, and the government must respect their territories. So anyway, that's all important, and that you can go back to that one and look that one page, and it's listed so right here, the division of powers. It's a good place to go back if you want to find out what powers they have and don't have. So I'm going to go over this. Who owns our sidewalks? What's this about? So this is, again, who owns our sidewalks? Does our state own the sidewalks, or does the government, the federal government, own the sidewalks? That's what it's kind of saying here. So who owns our sidewalks? And this is about for basically written. Stephen Goldsmith wrote it, but he's saying that the transfer power to the federal government undermines the whole constitution structure of the founders. So he's saying the founders, they did not want the government to have so much power, and now the transfer of power has been to the federal government. And he felt like this would destroy our local and our self-government in the towns and cities across America, and that their power was being destroyed. And he said these powers are enumerated and supported by the 10th Amendment, and we know that powers reserved to the states. And actually, President Jefferson basically said the doctrine of reserved powers was the foundation of our Constitution. Jefferson said we must protect our states, and that the foundation is these reserved powers. The 10th Amendment was very important. To take a single step beyond the boundaries of this is taking basically the boundaries off, where the government can take over and the power there. So the most power should be at the lower levels, but now are they? Is what he's saying. There's a problem. The most political activity should be at the local and state rather than the federal. But is it? So today he says the opposite is true. He said our federal government has vastly grown in size and power, and our Congress and our Supreme Court in our federal government have gone beyond boundaries by taking on authority that was also supposedly to be limited to our states. So the 10th Amendment has just become not true anymore. He said, not useful to them. So he said, basically right now, our federal judges run our jails, bus our children, manage our schools, determine rights of our employees, detailed conditions of art even what can be displayed on city property. These are all federal regulations that should have stayed at the state level and not gone up for the country to come into the states and tell them how to do these things. An example is the ADA, American Disability Act. And the American Disability Act came forth and mandated now that handicapped sloped sidewalks should be in all these areas, and even said the precise angle that each state should have and the precise type of sidewalk and control the sidewalks. That every sidewalk in the country now should be controlled by the government under the laws for disability, for handicapped. And this has got out of hand in a lot of places, because now each state has to go in and say, okay, we're going to have to redo all of our sidewalks and make sure all of these are the exact precise angles. So the federal judiciary, Fair Labor Standards Act, was when they put forth rules of the federal government. The government raised the eyebrows even of liberals, saying, basically saying, okay, the government's going to come in and tell what employers can do in overtime rates and work weeks and control these. And non-federal units of government must negotiate with employee compensations and overtime rates and all these things to Congress, even down to the minute. And they said, this is supposed to be ruled by the states. Now we have the government ruling in areas of employment and business, right? Also, American tax policy decided by federal judges, that these tax policies were decided by federal judges. Well, our federal judges, he said, they have not even been elected. Federal judges are chosen by the President of the United States and then by the Senate. And now we have federal judges that are saying how that the citizens, of the states are going to follow these rules, and they have not been elected. So basically saying, now, what about all the mandating tax hikes and stuff by the federal government? How can they do that? Mandate these things when they haven't been basically elected. So if they haven't been elected, we have taxation without representation, because they do not represent us. They do not represent the people, because the people haven't voted for them. So that's a big deal. Thus, there's taxation without representation if the federal judges decide anything to do with taxes. So basically, that's one of the taxation of the without representation is why we declared one of the main reasons the Declaration of Independence was declared. Not the main reason, but one of the main reasons. He said we must focus now on reducing our federal government and making sure excesses are well funded. Basically, we need to stop doing this. We need to not disregard the 10th Amendment. This will endanger our very nation as our central government gets too much power. And our whole American life experiment, he's basically said, is based on this balance of power between our federal government and our states. So he says the federal government must be revised in focus, and we must weave the principles of the 10th Amendment, that 10th Amendment giving the states power back, into the basic fabric of American politics. He said that's where a good place to start. So this whole article is really good and talking about what's going on and the power of the federal government taking over the power of the states. Even in the next election, I remember, President Trump basically saying we need to give the powers back to the states. There's certain presidents that have tried that, and we'll find out. Ronald Reagan being one of those that have tried to give back more power to the states than to the government, which is really what we need to do, because when the government has too much power, we're going to have more of a emperor dictatorship or whatever, dictating where the states have limited power. It's more of a unitary government than it is for as a federal government. So now I'm going to go back. I think I was going to start this next section, but maybe I will wait. Let's see. I'll show you. We're going to go into the history of federalism and the rise of central power. I think I'll do that in the next video, because it tells us why, through history, showing history, why this federalism is important, the balance of power between the state and the federal government.